should have kept driving. That's what I tell myself now, staring at the ceiling of my apartment with its water stains that look like continents on a faded map. If I had just kept my eyes on the road ahead, and my hands at 10 and 2 like my father taught me, my life would still be ordinary. Difficult, exhausting, but ordinary. The evening had been particularly cruel. My 12-hour shift at Mercy General had left me with aching feet, and the lingering scent of antiseptic clinging to my scrubs. 3 patients had coded, and we'd lost one. An elderly woman with kind eyes, who had squeezed my hand that morning and told me I reminded her of her granddaughter. I'd barely had time to process her passing before being assigned to another bed. Rain pelted against my windshield as I drove home through the industrial district, a shortcut I rarely took but desperately needed that night. My ancient Honda protested with each gear shift, the engine whining like it might give up at any moment. Just like me. "Hold it together," I whispered to both of us, squinting through the streaked glass. The streetlights cast yellow halos in the darkness, illuminating puddles that looked bottomless in the night. My phone buzzed with another text from my landlord, 3rd time that day, reminding me that rent was due, as if I could forget the sword dangling over my head. The rain suddenly intensified, and I leaned forward, slowing down to navigate a particularly dark stretch of road lined with abandoned warehouses. That's when I saw it. The crumpled mass of metal and leather skidding across the wet asphalt about 50 yards ahead. I hit the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly before coming to a stop. For 3 seconds, I sat frozen, debating what to do. This neighborhood wasn't known for its safety, especially after dark. But I was a nurse. I'd taken an oath. "Damn it," I muttered, pulling to the shoulder and grabbing my emergency kit from the passenger seat. The rain immediately plastered my hair to my face as I approached the accident scene. A sleek black motorcycle lay on its side, expensive and powerful looking even in its damaged state. Several yards away, a figure in dark clothing was attempting to sit up. "Don't move," I called out, jogging toward him. "I'm a nurse. You could have spinal injuries." As I drew closer, the figure turned toward me, and something primitive in my brain whispered a warning. Even sprawled on the wet pavement, there was something dangerous about this man. He was large, broad-shouldered and tall, dressed in what I could now see was a leather jacket that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. His helmet had protected his head, but lay cracked beside him. "I'm fine," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the sound of the rain. Despite his words, I could see he was favoring his right side, and a dark stain spread across his sleeve. "You're bleeding," I pointed out, kneeling beside him despite my instincts screaming at me to return to my car. "Let me help you." His face remained in shadow, but I felt his eyes assessing me, taking in my soaked scrubs, my messy ponytail, the dark circles under my eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he shifted, and the streetlight caught his features. My breath caught. He wasn't just handsome, he was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. A predator's symmetry, sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. A thin scar traced its way from his temple to his jaw on the left side, the only flaw in an otherwise perfect face. "What's your name?" he asked, still making no move to accept my help. "Emma," I answered automatically. "Emma Reyes." Something flickered across his expression, interest perhaps, or amusement. "Well, Emma Reyes, I appreciate your concern, but I have people who handle these situations." As if on cue, the low purr of an engine approached. I glanced over my shoulder to see a black SUV with tinted windows pulling up beside my Honda. My stomach clenched with sudden fear. "Your people?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. He nodded once, then winced. The first sign that he was actually in pain despite his stoic demeanor. "Let me at least check your injuries before they take you," I insisted, professional instincts overriding my fear. "You could be in shock and not realize how badly you're hurt." The man's dark eyes narrowed, but after a moment, he gave a slight nod. I opened my kit and pulled out gloves, working quickly but thoroughly, checking his pupils, pulse, and the wound on his arm, which appeared to be a deep abrasion rather than anything life-threatening. Possible concussion, though the helmet took most of the impact. Your right wrist is swelling, Might be sprained. The arm needs cleaning and dressing, and you should get x-rays to rule out fractures, I reported clinically, though my hands trembled slightly as I applied a temporary dressing to his arm. 2 men in suits emerged from the SUV, moving with a purposeful efficiency that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They weren't rushing, but they weren't wasting movements either. One immediately went to the motorcycle, while the other approached us. "Mr. Russo," the man said, his tone deferential. "The car is ready." Mr. Russo. The name settled in my mind, and I tried to place where I'd heard it before. "Thank you, Marco," the injured man replied, then turned to me. "It seems I owe you a debt of gratitude, Emma Reyes." The way he said my name sent an involuntary shiver through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. He reached into his jacket with his uninjured arm and pulled out a business card, holding it out to me. "If you ever need anything at all, call this number." I hesitated before accepting the simple black card embossed with only a phone number in silver. No name, no title. I was just doing my job, I said. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "You're off the clock, though, aren't you?" Before I could respond, he was standing, moving with a grace that belied his injuries. The man called Marco was at his side immediately, not touching him, but hovering close enough to assist if needed. "Your motorcycle," I began, gesturing to where the other man was already loading the damaged bike into the back of a second vehicle that had arrived silently. "Will be replaced tomorrow," Mr. Russo finished, his eyes never leaving mine. "Your kindness, however, is irreplaceable." There was something hypnotic about his gaze, something that made me feel simultaneously seen and exposed. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how I must look, soaked through, exhausted, probably with remnants of hospital makeup smeared under my eyes. "Get home safely, Emma," he said, turning toward the SUV. "These roads can be dangerous at night." It sounded like a warning, though I couldn't imagine why. As he slid into the back seat, I caught a glimpse of the interior, leather seats, and what looked like a mobile office setup. The door closed, and the tinted window sealed him away from view. Within moments, both vehicles had pulled away, leaving me standing alone in the rain, clutching a mysterious business card and wondering what the hell had just happened. I returned to my car in a daze, tossing my wet kit onto the passenger seat and cranking the heater to its highest setting, though it barely produced more than lukewarm air. As I pulled back onto the road, I glanced at the card I'd set on the dashboard, the silver numbers catching the intermittent light from passing street lamps. That should have been the end of it, a strange encounter on a rainy night. A good deed for a stranger who clearly moved in circles far removed from mine. But as I turned into the parking lot of my rundown apartment building, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street, similar to the ones that had collected Mr. Russo, though I couldn't be sure it was the same. My phone buzzed again as I killed the engine. This time, it wasn't my landlord, but the hospital. Another nurse had called in sick, and they needed me for a double shift starting at 6 a.m. I closed my eyes, calculating the 5 hours of sleep I'd get if I fell asleep immediately, which seemed unlikely given the adrenaline still coursing through my system. I grabbed the business card from my dashboard on impulse, tucking it into my wallet, before gathering my things and making my way up 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. The elevator had been broken for weeks, another item on the building manager's list of things that weren't priorities. The familiar smell of old carpet and cheap air freshener greeted me as I unlocked my door. Home, sweet home. A studio apartment barely large enough to contain a bed, a love seat, and a kitchenette with appliances from the previous century. But it was mine, at least until I fell behind on rent again. I peeled off my wet clothes and took the hottest shower my building's ancient water heater would allow, trying to wash away the hospital, the rain, and the lingering sensation of dark eyes studying me. By the time I collapsed into bed, my alarm was set to ring in 4 hours, and thoughts of the mysterious Mr. Russo had been mostly replaced by mental preparations for tomorrow's shift. I was almost asleep when my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you again for your assistance tonight, Ms. Reyes. My personal physician confirmed your assessment was correct. Your skills are impressive." I stared at the message, a chill running through me. I hadn't given him my number. I hadn't given him anything except my name. Before I could decide whether to respond, A second message appeared. Rest well. I'll be in touch. Sleep eluded me for a long time after that. The next morning arrived with cruel swiftness. My alarm blared at 5 a.m., and I dragged myself out of bed, muscles protesting after too little rest. As I splashed water on my face, I wondered if I'd dreamed the text messages, but when I checked my phone, they were still there, ominous in their politeness. I dressed quickly in clean scrubs, gulped down instant coffee that tasted like chemicals, and headed for the door. When I opened it, I nearly tripped over a small package sitting on my welcome mat, a plain white box tied with a black ribbon. There was no card, no note, no indication of who had left it or how they had gotten past the building's security door. With trembling fingers, I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a brand new stethoscope, not the basic model I'd been saving for, but the top-of-the-line digital one I'd admired in medical supply catalogs, the one that cost more than 2 weeks of my salary. Tucked beside it was a card, the same heavy black stock as the business card from last night. In silver ink, a single line of elegant handwriting. A small token of appreciation. More to come. I dropped the box as though it had burned me. More to come? What did that mean? And how had he found out where I lived? The memory of the black sedan parked outside my building flashed through my mind. Had I been followed? Watched? The thought sent a wave of nausea through me. I needed to leave for work, but suddenly the idea of stepping outside my apartment seemed daunting. What if he was out there? What if his people were waiting? Don't be ridiculous, I muttered to myself. He's just some rich guy who's overly grateful you helped him. Take the gift and move on. But as I reluctantly picked up the stethoscope and headed out, I couldn't shake the feeling that in stopping to help a stranger last night, I'd made a mistake that would change everything. I had no idea just how right I was. The hospital was in chaos when I arrived, the emergency department overflowing with victims from a multi-car pileup on the freeway. I immediately stowed the expensive stethoscope in my locker, unwilling to invite questions I couldn't answer, and threw myself into the work. "Emma, Trauma 3, now!" Dr. Wilson called out as I rushed past the nurse's station. I followed him into the trauma bay where paramedics were transferring a young man with multiple lacerations and what looked like a pneumothorax. For the next 12 hours, I existed in that strange state of hyperfocus that only emergency medicine can induce. All thoughts of mysterious motorcyclists and expensive gifts pushed to the back of my mind as I moved from one patient to the next, one crisis to another. It wasn't until my break at 6 p.m. that reality crashed back in. I collapsed onto a chair in the break room, unwrapping a sandwich I'd grabbed from the cafeteria, when Lacey, one of the other nurses, slid into the seat across from me. "So," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "care to explain why there's a man in an Armani suit asking for you at the front desk?" My sandwich stopped halfway to my mouth. "What?" Lacey leaned forward, eyes wide. Tall guy, built like a linebacker, standing there like he owns the place. Asked specifically for Emma Reyes, said he's your driver. "My driver?" I repeated stupidly. That's what I said. Lacey's expression was hungry for details. "Emma, what are you not telling me? Have you been secretly dating some Wall Street type?" "No, of course not." I set down my sandwich, appetite gone. It must be a mistake. But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't. The text messages, the stethoscope, more to come. "Well, mistake or not, he's not leaving until he speaks with you. Security already tried to move him along." I stood up, smoothing my scrubs with suddenly clammy hands. "I'll handle it." "I want details," Lacey called after me as I left the break room. The man wasn't hard to spot. Just as Lacey had described, he stood near the reception desk, his expensive suit and rigid posture making him look absurdly out of place among the worn furniture and harried hospital staff. I recognized him as one of the men who had arrived to help Mr. Russo the night before. Marco, I thought his name was. He spotted me the moment I entered the waiting area, his eyes locking onto mine with unnerving precision. "Ms. Reyes," he said, inclining his head slightly. "Thank you for coming." "I'm working," I replied, keeping my voice low to avoid drawing more attention. Several patients were already watching us curiously. "What are you doing here?" "Mr. Russo has sent me to drive you home after your shift." I blinked at him. "That's not necessary." "I have my car." "Your vehicle has been taken care of," he said, as if this explained everything. "Mr. Russo insists on ensuring your safety." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean, taken care of?" "It has been serviced and delivered to your residence." The brakes were dangerously worn, and the timing belt was near failure. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Someone, Mr. Russo, had taken my car, had it repaired without my knowledge or consent, and now wanted to drive me home? "This is inappropriate," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I don't know Mr. Russo. I helped him after an accident, that's all. I don't need rides or gifts or car repairs." Marco's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Russo is a man who pays his debts. You provided assistance when others would have driven past. He values that. Well, tell him I appreciate the thought, but Ms. Reyes," Marco interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "In my experience, it's easier to accept Mr. Russo's gratitude than to refuse it. He is persistent." The way he said persistent made my skin crawl. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but there was something beneath his polite demeanor that suggested refusal wasn't really an option. "My shift ends at midnight," I found myself saying. Marco nodded. "I'll be waiting." Then he turned and walked out, leaving me standing there with the distinct feeling that I'd just agreed to something I didn't fully understand. The remainder of my shift crawled by, my thoughts constantly drifting to what awaited me at midnight. I considered calling in another nurse to cover, claiming illness, but something told me that wouldn't solve the problem. Mr. Russo had found my apartment. He'd had my car serviced. He'd discovered where I worked and my phone number. If he wanted to find me, he would. As midnight approached, I changed out of my scrubs in the locker room, hyper-aware of Lacey's curious glances. "So, are you going to tell me about your secret admirer?" she asked as I pulled on my jeans. "He's not," I began, then sighed. "It's complicated. I helped someone after a motorcycle accident last night, and he's being overly grateful." "Overly grateful how?" Lacey pressed. I hesitated, then opened my locker and showed her the stethoscope. Her eyes widened. "Holy shit, Emma. That's the Cardiotech 7000. It costs like $2,000. "I know," I said miserably, and apparently he had my car serviced today, without asking. "Who is this guy?" Lacey's voice had lost its teasing quality, replaced by genuine concern. "His name is Russo. That's all I know." Lacey's face went very still. "Russo? As in Dominic Russo?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Of course, that's why it had sounded familiar last night. Dominic Russo was a name whispered in the emergency department when certain patients came in, patients with suspicious gunshot wounds who refused to cooperate with police, patients who left against medical advice as soon as they were stable, patients who had silent men in suits standing guard outside their rooms. "I don't know his first name," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Emma," Lacey said, gripping my arm tightly. "If it's him, you need to be careful. The Russos control everything north of the river. Everything. Drugs, gambling, protection rackets. They're the real deal." I swallowed hard, the pieces falling into place, the expensive motorcycle, the men who appeared within minutes of the accident. The way Mr. Russo had carried himself, even injured, like a man accustomed to power, to being obeyed. "What do I do?" I whispered. Lacey released my arm. "Be polite. Accept his thanks. Then distance yourself as quickly and carefully as possible." Sound advice. But as I walked toward the hospital exit at the end of my shift, I had the sinking feeling it was already too late for distancing. Marco was waiting exactly where he'd said he would be, standing beside a gleaming black Bentley that looked obscenely expensive against the backdrop of the hospital's aging infrastructure. "Ms. Reyes," he greeted me, opening the rear passenger door. I hesitated on the threshold. Once I got into that car, I would be stepping into Dominic Russo's world. A world I knew nothing about except that it was dangerous. "Is Mr. Russo in the car?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Marco shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'm to drive you home safely. Those are my instructions. After a moment's deliberation, I slid into the back seat, my tired body immediately sinking into buttery leather that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The interior smelled of expensive cologne and leather conditioner, the kind of luxury I'd only experienced in movies. The drive was silent. I watched the city pass by through tinted windows, noting how Marco took a route that avoided the industrial district where I'd found Mr. Russo the night before. When we pulled up to my apartment building, I was surprised to see my Honda parked in its usual spot, looking cleaner than it had in years. "Your keys," Marco said, handing me a set that included not only my car key but also what looked like a new key for my apartment. I opened my mouth to question this, but he continued before I could speak. "The locks were changed today, for security purposes." My temper, suppressed by exhaustion and a healthy dose of fear, finally flared. "That's not okay. You can't just change the locks on my apartment." Marco's expression remained impassive. "The building manager was compensated for his cooperation. Your belongings are secure, and now your home is as well." I clutched the keys, my hand shaking with a mixture of fear and indignation. "Please tell Mr. Russo that while I appreciate his concern, I don't need or want his protection. I helped him because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return." "I will convey your message," Marco replied, though something in his tone suggested it would make little difference. "Have a good night, Ms. Reyes." I got out of the car, standing on the sidewalk until the Bentley pulled away and disappeared around the corner. Only then did I allow myself to let out the breath I'd been holding, my legs suddenly so weak I had to lean against a nearby lamppost for support. What had I gotten myself into? My apartment, when I entered it, was both familiar and strange. Everything was in its place, but it felt different. Cleaner, perhaps. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish. I moved through the small space, checking drawers and closets, half expecting to find them rifled through, but everything seemed untouched. Until I reached the kitchenette. There, on the counter, sat a basket overflowing with gourmet foods, fresh bread, cheeses, fruits, chocolates, and a bottle of wine that I was certain cost more than all the food in my refrigerator combined. Another black card nestled among the items. "Sustenance for a healer. Rest well, Emma." My name was written in the same elegant silver script as before. I picked up the card, turning it over in my hand, wondering what kind of man sent midnight gift baskets to women he'd met once, changed their locks, serviced their cars. A dangerous one, my mind supplied. I was contemplating whether to throw the basket away when my phone buzzed with a text. The Chateau Margaux pairs beautifully with the Comté in the basket, a small comfort after a difficult day in the ER. My blood ran cold. How did he know I'd had a difficult day? Before I could stop myself, I moved to the window and peered through the blinds at the street below. No black cars, no suited men standing watch, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Somewhere, watching. I drew the blinds tight and sank onto my love seat, exhaustion and fear warring within me. I should call the police, I thought, but what would I say? That a man was sending me gifts? That someone had changed my locks and fixed my car? They'd laugh me out of the station, and if Dominic Russo was who Lacey thought he was, the police might not be eager to interfere anyway. My phone buzzed again. "Sleep, Emma. Tomorrow will be easier." I set the phone down as if it had burned me. Then, moving on autopilot, I showered, changed, and fell into bed. Too exhausted to think any more about mysterious Mafia bosses or their unsettling attention, I dreamed of dark eyes watching me from the shadows, of elegant hands offering gifts that turned to chains. I dreamed of running down endless hospital corridors, pursued by something I couldn't see but could feel at my back, growing closer with each ragged breath. When my alarm blared at 5 a.m., I woke, gasping, tangled in sheets damp with sweat. For one blissful moment, I thought perhaps the events of the past 2 days had been nothing but an elaborate nightmare. Then I saw the new keys on my nightstand, and reality came crashing back. I had the day off, a rare occurrence that usually filled me with relief, but now left me feeling exposed. What was I supposed to do with a full day of freedom when a man like Dominic Russo had taken an interest in me? The answer came as I was making coffee. Staring blankly at the gift basket I'd been too wary to touch last night, my phone chimed with a text from a now familiar unknown number. "Good morning, Emma. A car will collect you at 11 a.m. Dress comfortably. I nearly dropped the phone. This had gone far enough. I typed back quickly, my fingers clumsy with indignation. No, thank you. I have plans today. The response was immediate. Cancel them. 2 words. No explanation. No pleasantries. Just an order, delivered with the confidence of someone unaccustomed to refusal. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Who did he think he was? I began typing a firm refusal when another message appeared. Please, Emma. I wish to thank you properly for your assistance. Just a few hours of your time. The sudden shift to politeness caught me off guard. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. A memory flashed, dark eyes studying me in the rain, a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Dangerous, yes, but also something else. Something that had made me stop on a deserted road when common sense said to keep driving. Where are we going? I finally typed. Somewhere safe. I give you my word. His word. What was that worth? But as I stood in my kitchen, clutching my phone and considering my options, I realized I didn't have many. I could refuse and risk his persistence, as Marco had put it. I could run. But to where? How far would I get before his people found me? Or I could go, meet with him on his terms, and hope that satisfying his sense of debt would be the end of it. Fine. 11 a.m., I replied, already questioning my decision. Thank you, Emma. Until then. I set down my phone and looked around my apartment, my sanctuary, now invaded by his presence, his knowledge. Whatever happened today would determine the course of my future. I was sure of it. And as I moved to my closet to find something comfortable to wear to meet a Mafia boss, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking willingly into the lion's den. At exactly 11 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text. We're outside. I took one last look in the mirror, second-guessing my choice of dark jeans, boots, and a simple green sweater that brought out the flecks of gold in my hazel eyes. Not that I was trying to impress him, I told myself. But somehow, the thought of looking disheveled in front of Dominic Russo made me uneasy. The black Bentley waited at the curb, but this time, when the door opened, it wasn't Marco who greeted me, but Dominic Russo himself. He stood beside the car, perfectly tailored in charcoal slacks and a black cashmere sweater that made his dark eyes seem even more intense. The casual elegance of his attire did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. His right wrist was wrapped in a support bandage, the sprain I'd diagnosed, and a butterfly closure sealed the cut on his temple. Otherwise, he looked nothing like the injured man I'd found in the rain. He exuded power, control, and something else that made my heart race, despite my determination to remain calm. Emma, he said, my name like silk in his mouth. Thank you for coming. I approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. Did I have a choice? A smile touched his lips, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Everyone has choices. Some are simply easier than others. He gestured to the open door. I hesitated, then slid inside, unsurprised when he joined me rather than taking the front passenger seat. Marco was behind the wheel, as silent and inscrutable as before. Where are we going? I asked as the car pulled away from the curb. To my home, he replied. I find it's the one place I can truly relax. He studied me for a moment. You look tired, Emma. 12-hour shifts in the ER tend to have that effect, I replied, more sharply than I'd intended. Yes, I imagine they do. He leaned back slightly, giving me space. You've been at Mercy General for 3 years. Before that, City Memorial, where you completed your nursing degree while working nights as a CNA, top of your class despite working full-time. Impressive. My mouth went dry. How do you know all that? I make it a point to know who I'm dealing with. And I don't get the same courtesy, I challenged, surprising myself with my boldness. Dominic raised an eyebrow. What would you like to know? Everything, I thought. Who are you, really? What do you want from me? Why won't you leave me alone? Let's start with your first name, I said instead. Since you already know mine. Dominic, he confirmed. Though most people call me Dom. And what do you do, Dominic? I pressed, even though I already suspected the answer. His lips curved into a smile that held no humor. I manage various business interests across the city. Import, export, real estate, private security, entertainment venues. All perfect fronts for money laundering and other illegal activities, if Lacey was right about him. And crashing motorcycles in the rain? Is that a hobby or a business interest? A genuine laugh escaped him, rich and unexpectedly warm. Neither. That was an unusual circumstance. I waited for him to elaborate, but he simply watched me, seemingly content to let the silence stretch between us. The city gradually gave way to suburbs, then to increasingly exclusive neighborhoods with gated estates set back from tree-lined streets. Finally, we turned onto a private drive flanked by stone pillars, a discreet security booth visible just inside the gate. The guard nodded to Marco as we passed, not even asking for identification. The driveway curved through manicured grounds before revealing a sprawling mansion of stone and glass, modern yet somehow timeless in its elegance. Water features flanked the entrance, the gentle sound of flowing water creating an atmosphere of tranquility that seemed at odds with the man beside me. "Welcome to my home," Dominic said, as the car came to a stop at the front entrance. I remained rooted to the seat, even as he exited and extended his hand to help me out. "Why am I here, Dominic?" His expression softened fractionally. "Because I owe you a debt, Emma, and I always pay my debts." The stethoscope was more than enough, I insisted. "A tool to help you do your job better is hardly adequate repayment for saving my life." "I didn't save your life." His dark eyes held mine. "You stopped on a deserted road to help a stranger who could have been anyone. Do you know how rare that kind of decency is in this world? Put that way, I supposed he had a point. Still, the extravagance of his gratitude made me deeply uncomfortable. After a moment's hesitation, I placed my hand in his and allowed him to help me from the car. His touch was warm and firm, his fingers lingering on mine a second longer than necessary before releasing me. The interior of the house was just as impressive as the exterior. Soaring ceilings, museum-quality art on the walls, furnishings that looked both expensive and comfortable. No photos, I noticed. Nothing personal on display. "This way," Dominic said, leading me through the foyer and down a hallway to a sun-drenched room overlooking an infinity pool and the city skyline beyond. A table was set for two beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, an elegant lunch spread waiting. "I thought we could eat before I show you the reason I brought you here," he said, pulling out a chair for me. I sat, my curiosity piqued despite my wariness. "And what reason is that?" "Patience, Emma." He took the seat opposite mine. "First, tell me about your day yesterday." Marco mentioned the emergency department was unusually busy. The casual reference to Marco's surveillance sent a chill through me, but I forced myself to remain composed. "There was a pileup on the freeway, multiple traumas. And yet you handled it with remarkable composure. The attending physician spoke highly of your skills." I stared at him. "You talked to Dr. Wilson?" Dominic shrugged, the gesture elegant despite its casualness. "As I said, I make it a point to know who I'm dealing with. That includes the people who work with you." Anger flared in me. "My colleagues are off limits, Dominic. My workplace is off limits. My apartment is off limits. I don't need new locks or serviced cars or midnight deliveries. I need you to respect my boundaries." I expected anger in return. Men like him, men of power, rarely took kindly to being challenged. But Dominic merely studied me with what looked like admiration. "You're not afraid of me," he observed. "Should I be?" A shadow crossed his face. "Most people are." "I'm not most people," I replied, holding his gaze. "No," he agreed softly. "You're not." We ate in silence for a few minutes, the tension between us palpable but not entirely unpleasant. The food was exquisite, probably prepared by a private chef, I guessed, but I was too on edge to fully appreciate it. "You said you have business interests," I ventured finally. "What kind?" "The legitimate kind," he answered, a hint of amusement in his voice. Contrary to what you may have heard, so he knew I'd been asking about him. Of course he did. "And the illegitimate kind?" I pressed. Dominic set down his fork, his expression suddenly serious. "There are many shades of gray in this world, Emma. What's legal isn't always what's right, and what's illegal isn't always wrong." "That's not an answer." "No, it's not," he agreed, "but it's all you're going to get for now." After lunch, he led me through the house to a wing that seemed different from the rest, warmer somehow, with softer lighting and more comfortable furnishings. We stopped at a door, and for the first time since I'd met him, Dominic appeared almost hesitant. "What I'm about to show you is very private," he said. "Very few people have seen this. I'm trusting you, Emma." Before I could respond, he opened the door, revealing a large, sunny room that had been converted into a state-of-the-art medical facility. Hospital beds, monitoring equipment, medication cabinets, even what looked like a scaled-down operating theater, all of it pristine and clearly top of the line. But it was the occupant of one of the beds that drew my attention. A young woman, perhaps 20, lay sleeping, an IV in her arm and monitors tracking her vital signs. She was painfully thin, her complexion sallow, but even in illness, I could see she was beautiful, with the same dark hair and fine features as Dominic. "My sister, Sophia," Dominic said quietly, moving to stand beside her bed. "She has a rare form of leukemia. The treatments at the hospital were not progressing as well as we'd hoped, so I brought her home." I approached cautiously, my nursing instincts immediately assessing the patient. "How long has she been ill?" 3 years. There was a brief remission last year, but it didn't last." He brushed a strand of hair from his sister's forehead, with a tenderness that caught me off guard. "She's been here for 2 months. I've hired the best specialists, flown in experimental treatments from Europe, Japan, anywhere that might help. But she's getting weaker." Understanding dawned. "This is why you brought me here. You want me to care for her." Dominic turned to face me. "I want to hire you as her private nurse, full-time." "Name your price." "I already have a job," I pointed out. "One that barely pays your rent," he countered. "One that exhausts you and offers little chance for advancement. I'm offering you triple your current salary, a suite of rooms here in the house, and the opportunity to focus on a single patient instead of juggling dozens." The offer was tempting, almost suspiciously so. "Why me?" "You could hire any nurse in the city, someone with more experience in oncology, because when you found me on that road, your first concern was my well-being, not who I was or what you could get from me. Because you have exceptional skills, as verified by everyone I've spoken to, and because Sophia liked you, liked me. She's never met me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She saw the security footage of you helping me after the accident. She said you had kind eyes." I glanced back at the sleeping young woman, my heart conflicted. The facility was impressive, and the chance to provide one-on-one care was rare in my profession. But living in Dominic Russo's house, being further drawn into his world. "I need time to think about it," I said finally. Dominic nodded, as if he'd expected this response. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He paused, then added, "But know that regardless of your decision about the job, my gratitude, and my interest, remain unchanged." The way he said interest sent a shiver down my spine, not entirely from fear. As we left Sophia's room, I couldn't help asking, "The motorcycle accident, was it really an accident?" Dominic's expression hardened. "No, but that's a conversation for another day." The ride back to my apartment was quiet, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd seen and what he'd offered. When Marco pulled up to my building, Dominic handed me another of his black business cards, this one with a second number written on the back in silver ink. "My private line," he explained. "When you've made your decision." I took the card, our fingers brushing in the exchange. "And if I say no," his eyes met mine, dark and unreadable, "then I'll respect your choice, but I hope you'll say yes, Emma, not for my sake, but for Sophia's." As I watched the Bentley pull away, I knew the decision before me was about more than a job offer. It was about stepping into Dominic Russo's world, a world of wealth and power, yes, but also of secrets and dangers I could only begin to imagine. Whatever I chose, I sensed my life would never be quite the same again. 3 days passed before I called the number on Dominic's card. 3 days of returning to my apartment after grueling hospital shifts, staring at the business card on my coffee table and weighing my options. 3 days of noticing black sedans parked discreetly down the street, of feeling watched without being certain. 3 days of wondering about Sophia Russo, alone in that beautiful medical suite, fighting for her life. I made the call on a rainy Tuesday evening, my hands trembling slightly as I dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. "Emma." Not a question, but a statement, as if he'd been waiting for my call all along. "I'll do it," I said without preamble. I'll take care of your sister, but I have conditions. A pause. Then, I'm listening. First, I need 2 weeks to train my replacement at the hospital. I won't leave them short-handed. Understood. Second, I want my own car on the property. I need to be able to come and go as I please. Reasonable, though I'd prefer you accepted a security detail when leaving the estate. I gripped the phone tighter. Third, no more surveillance. No more having your people follow me or gather information on me or my colleagues. A longer pause this time. I can agree to no surveillance of your colleagues. Your personal safety, however, is non-negotiable once you're under my roof. I considered pushing back, but sensed it would be futile. Fine. But I want honesty, Dominic. If I'm going to live in your house and care for your sister, I need to know what I'm getting into. You're asking for my trust, he observed, his voice soft but intense. Yes. Trust goes both ways, Emma. I closed my eyes, thinking of Sophia's thin face, of the determined way Dominic had spoken of saving her. Whatever else he was, his love for his sister seemed genuine. I know, I replied. Then we have an agreement. I could almost hear him smile through the phone. Marco will handle the paperwork. When can you start? 2 weeks from now, I confirmed. After I've properly transitioned my patients. 2 weeks, he echoed. I look forward to it, Emma. The line went dead, and I sat staring at my phone, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. I gave notice at the hospital, citing a private nursing opportunity that was too good to pass up. Lacey cornered me in the locker room the day after I submitted my resignation. It's him, isn't it? She demanded. Russo. I couldn't meet her eyes. His sister is very ill. Emma, listen to me. Lacey gripped my shoulders. These people aren't like us. They live by different rules. If you go into that world, I know what I'm doing. I interrupted, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Lacey released me with a sigh. Just be careful. And call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I promised I would, though we both knew if I truly needed help, Lacey would be powerless to provide it. The day before I was set to move to Dominic's estate, I returned home to find Marco waiting outside my apartment door, a thick envelope in his hand. Your employment contract and advance payment, he explained, handing me the envelope. Mr. Russo also asked me to help with your packing if needed. I shook my head. I don't have much. I can manage on my own. Marco nodded, unsurprised. In that case, I'll return tomorrow at 10 a.m. to transport you to the estate. He hesitated, then added, Ms. Reyes, Mr. Russo has been different since meeting you. Calmer, more focused. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I'm just going to be his sister's nurse. Something like pity flashed in Marco's eyes. Of course, he said, in a tone that suggested he believed nothing of the sort. After he left, I opened the envelope. The contract was straightforward, outlining my duties, compensation, which was indeed triple my hospital salary, and benefits, including a suite of rooms in the east wing of the mansion. What caught my attention was the addendum, a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive it essentially forbade me from discussing anything I saw or heard within the Russo estate. I signed it anyway. The second item in the envelope was a cashier's check for an amount that made my eyes widen, a month's salary in advance, plus what the contract termed a signing bonus. More money than I'd seen at one time in my entire life. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the check, wondering again what I was getting myself into. But when I thought of Sophia, of how Dominic's voice had softened when he spoke of her, I felt a resolve strengthen within me. Whatever his business, whatever danger might surround him, his sister deserved the best care possible. And I needed a change. A chance to use my skills without the crushing pace and bureaucracy of the hospital. A chance to make a difference for one patient instead of being spread too thin across dozens. The next morning, Marco arrived precisely at 10 a.m. He loaded my 2 suitcases into the trunk of the Bentley while I took one last look around my apartment. It felt strange to be leaving. This tiny space had been my haven for 3 years, despite its flaws. Ready, Ms. Reyes? Marco asked as I locked the door behind me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The drive to the Russo estate was quiet. I watched the city recede in the rearview mirror. a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation building within me. When we passed through the gates of the estate, I noticed additional security personnel that hadn't been present during my first visit. Men in dark suits, discreetly stationed along the perimeter, communication devices visible in their ears. "Is something wrong?" I asked Marco, nodding toward one of the guards. "Additional precautions," he replied without elaboration. Dominic was waiting on the front steps when we arrived, dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His dark eyes locked onto mine as I emerged from the car, an intensity in his gaze that made my pulse quicken. "Welcome, Emma," he said, descending the steps to greet me. "I hope you had a smooth transition at the hospital." "As smooth as could be expected," I replied, suddenly self-conscious of my simple jeans and sweater beside his immaculate appearance. He gestured toward the house. "I've had your suite prepared. I think you'll find it comfortable." I followed him inside, noticing more subtle changes since my last visit. Additional staff moving quietly through the halls, a heightened sense of alertness among the security personnel. "What's going on, Dominic?" I asked quietly as we walked. "The extra security. Something's happened, hasn't it?" He glanced at me, surprise briefly crossing his features before his expression smoothed once more. "Perceptive. Yes, there's been a situation. Nothing that should concern you. If I'm living here, anything that affects the safety of the household concerns me," I pointed out. Dominic stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "You're right, of course." He seemed to consider his words carefully before continuing. "One of my business rivals has been making moves against my interests. The additional security is precautionary." "Business rivals," I repeated, infusing the words with all the skepticism I felt. A faint smile touched his lips. "You want honesty, I remember." He glanced around, then guided me into a nearby study, closing the door behind us. "The truth, then. There are several families that control various enterprises in this city. For decades, we've maintained a delicate balance of power and territory. Recently, the Castellano family has been testing those boundaries." "Testing? How?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "They hijacked a shipment of mine, injured 3 of my men." His voice was flat, emotionless, but I could see the cold fury in his eyes. "Then they had the audacity to propose a partnership that would amount to a takeover of my operations." I swallowed hard. "And the motorcycle accident was no accident," he confirmed. "I was returning from a meeting with Anthony Castellano when my brakes failed. The mechanism had been tampered with. The clinical part of my brain noted how lucky he'd been to escape with only minor injuries. The rest of me was trying to process the casual way he discussed what amounted to attempted murder. "So you're at war," I said softly. "Not yet." Dominic's voice hardened. "But Castellano is pushing for one." "And Sophia? Does she know?" Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "No. Her condition is precarious enough without adding stress. She believes I was simply careless on the bike in bad weather." I nodded, understanding his protective instinct. "I won't say anything to her. Thank you." He studied me for a moment. "Most people would be running for the door right now." "I'm not most people," I reminded him. "And I made a commitment to Sophia's care." The intensity of his gaze made me look away. "You're an extraordinary woman, Emma Reyes." Before I could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Marco entered after Dominic's acknowledgement. "Ms. Reyes's belongings have been taken to her suite," he reported. "And Dr. Patel has arrived to check on Miss Sophia." "Thank you, Marco." Dominic turned to me. "Would you like to meet Sophia's physician and review her treatment plan?" I nodded, grateful for the return to professional territory. "Of course." As we walked toward Sophia's medical suite, Dominic's hand found the small of my back, his touch light but warm through my sweater. I told myself the flutter in my stomach was simply nerves about meeting my new patient. Dr. Patel was an elegant woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She walked me through Sophia's medical history, current treatments, and the experimental protocol they were considering next. "The conventional treatments have been only marginally effective," she explained, showing me charts of Sophia's blood work and bone marrow biopsies. "This new therapy from Japan shows promise, but it's aggressive. She'll need careful monitoring for side effects." "That's why I'm here," I assured her. Sophia was awake when we entered her room, propped up against pillows and looking frail but alert. Her face brightened when she saw Dominic, then turned curious as her gaze fell on me. "Sophia, this is Emma Reyes," Dominic said, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "She's the nurse I told you about." Sophia's smile was tentative but warm. "You're the one who helped my brother after his accident." I returned her smile. "That's right. Dom says you're going to be staying here, taking care of me." She studied me with dark eyes so similar to her brother's. I warned him I might be a difficult patient. "All the best ones are," I replied, earning a soft laugh from her. "I like her already," Sophia told Dominic, who was watching our interaction with an unreadable expression. "I knew you would," he replied softly. Dr. Patel excused herself after finishing her examination, promising to return in 2 days to begin the new treatment protocol. Once she'd gone, I sat beside Sophia's bed, getting to know my new patient while Dominic watched from the doorway, his presence a constant, powerful reminder of why I was there. Later that evening, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Dominic showed me to my suite in the East Wing. The suite turned out to be larger than my entire apartment, with a spacious bedroom, private bathroom with a soaking tub, sitting area, and a small kitchenette. "I hope it meets your needs," Dominic said as I took in the luxurious surroundings, the elegant but comfortable furnishings. "It's beautiful," I admitted. "Thank you." He leaned against the doorframe, watching me. "Dinner is at 7 in the main dining room, though you're welcome to take your meals here if you prefer." I hesitated. "I should stay close to Sophia. The monitoring system will alert you to any changes in her condition," he assured me. "And she's stable tonight. Join me for dinner, Emma, please." There was something in his voice, not quite a command, but not quite a request either, an expectation, perhaps, that I would say yes. And despite everything I knew about him, everything I'd learned today about the dangerous world he inhabited, I found myself wanting to say yes. "All right," I agreed. "Dinner at 7. A smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and bringing warmth to his dark eyes. "I look forward to it." As he left, closing the door softly behind him, I sank onto the edge of the bed, my heart racing. What was I doing? Agreeing to dine with a man who casually discussed rival crime families and attempted murder, who had brought me into his home not just to care for his sister, but for reasons I still couldn't fully understand. And why, despite every warning bell sounding in my mind, did I feel drawn to him like a moth to a dangerous, beautiful flame? Dinner with Dominic became a nightly ritual over the next few weeks. After spending my days caring for Sophia, administering her treatments and monitoring her for side effects, I would change into something more formal and join him in the dining room at precisely 7 o'clock. At first, our conversations were cautious, circling around safe topics: Sophia's condition, my nursing experience, books we'd both read. But gradually, as I settled into life at the estate, the boundaries between us began to blur. "Tell me about your family," Dominic said one evening, refilling my wine glass with a vintage whose name I couldn't pronounce, but whose taste made me understand why people paid small fortunes for certain bottles. I hesitated, the wound still fresh even years later. "There's not much to tell. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19. No siblings." His expression softened. "I'm sorry, Emma. It was a long time ago," I said, though the pain in my chest suggested otherwise. "Loss doesn't diminish with time," he observed quietly. "It just becomes more familiar." I looked up, surprised by the understanding in his voice. "Is that how it was when you lost your parents?" A shadow crossed his face. "My father was a complicated man. His death left a void in our family, but also a legacy that I wasn't entirely prepared to shoulder." "The family business," I said, infusing the words with meaning. Dominic's eyes met mine, acknowledging what remained unspoken between us. "Yes. My mother died shortly after, some say from grief, though I suspect it was more from the strain of trying to hold everything together until I was ready to take control. And Sophia was left with just you." He nodded. "She was 14 when our mother died. I was 22, already involved in certain aspects of our father's enterprises, but suddenly responsible for everything: the business, our mother's funeral arrangements, Sophia's well-being. That's a heavy burden for a young man," I observed. We do what we must for family, he replied, his voice carrying a weight that spoke of choices made out of necessity rather than desire. As the days passed, I began to see the complex layers of Dominic Russo. Yes, he was a dangerous man who commanded a criminal empire with ruthless efficiency. But he was also a brother who read to his sister when she was too weak to hold a book, who knew precisely how she liked her tea, who monitored her medical reports with the attention of a physician. And increasingly, he was a man whose gaze followed me when I entered a room, whose hand found reasons to brush against mine, whose voice softened when we were alone. One evening, about a month after I'd arrived at the estate, I entered Sophia's room to find her sitting up in bed, a mischievous smile on her face that reminded me so much of her brother. It made my heart clench. "You like him," she said without preamble. I busied myself checking her IV line. "I don't know what you mean." Sophia laughed, the sound weaker than it should be for a woman her age, but genuine nonetheless. "Don't insult my intelligence, Emma. I see the way you look at my brother. And more importantly, I see the way he looks at you." Heat rose to my cheeks. "Dominic is my employer. Is that all he is?" she pressed, her dark eyes, so like her brother's, studying me intently. Before I could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew our attention. Raised voices, the sound of hurried footsteps. Sophia's eyes widened with alarm. "Stay here," I instructed, moving to the door and opening it a crack. Dominic was striding down the hallway, Marco at his side, both men with expressions I'd never seen before, cold, focused fury. Behind them, 2 security guards were supporting a third man who was bleeding profusely from a wound in his shoulder. "Get Dr. Patel here now," Dominic commanded, his voice sharp as a blade, "and double the security at all entrances." "What about Miss Sophia?" Marco asked. 2 men outside her door at all times. No one enters except Emma and Dr. Patel, my heart pounding. I closed the door quietly and turned back to Sophia, forcing a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine. Don't lie to me," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "It's Castellano, isn't it? Dom thinks I don't know about the threats, but I hear things." I hesitated, torn between honesty and protecting her from additional stress. Before I could decide, the door opened and Dominic entered, his dangerous expression immediately softening when he saw his sister. "What's happening?" Sophia demanded. Dominic glanced at me, then sighed. "Nothing for you to worry about, little bird." "Dom," Sophia's voice held a warning. "I'm not a child." A moment of silent communication passed between the siblings, some unspoken understanding that came from years of shared history. Finally, Dominic nodded. "There was an incident at one of our warehouses," he admitted. "Carlo was injured." "How bad?" Sophia asked. "He'll recover. Dr. Patel is on her way to treat him." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "And Castellano? Was it him?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "Yes." "What are you going to do?" He moved to her bedside, taking her hand. "What needs to be done? But you don't need to concern yourself with that. Your job is to focus on getting better." Sophia looked like she wanted to argue, but fatigue was already pulling at her. The excitement had drained what little energy she had. "Rest," Dominic said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll check on you later." As we left her room, Dominic's hand caught mine, pulling me into a nearby sitting room and closing the door behind us. "I need you to stay with Sophia tonight," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Don't leave her side for any reason. If anything changes with her condition, call me immediately." "What's happening, Dominic?" I asked, fear clenching my stomach. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture surprisingly human from a man who usually maintained such rigid control. "Castellano's men attacked one of my distribution centers, injured 3 of my people, including Carlo. And now?" His eyes met mine, dark and dangerous. "Now I send a message, one that will ensure Castellano understands the consequences of moving against me." A chill ran through me. "You mean violence?" "I mean protecting what's mine," he corrected, his voice softening as he reached out to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Including you and Sophia. I should have stepped back, should have maintained professional distance. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, craving the connection despite everything I knew about who he was and what he was about to do. "Be careful," I whispered. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps that I was expressing concern rather than judgment. Before I could analyze it, he leaned forward, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly blazed into something more urgent, more demanding. I responded with equal fervor, my hands gripping the lapels of his suit, drawing him closer. It was madness. I knew it, even as I surrendered to it. But in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Dominic rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since the night you found me in the rain," he confessed. "This is insane," I murmured. "You're a criminal?" he supplied. "A monster? Is that what you see when you look at me, Emma?" I shook my head slowly. "No, that's what scares me." He kissed me again, more gently this time. "Stay with Sophia. Lock the door. I'll return as soon as I can." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the ghost of his kiss on my lips and the knowledge that the man I was falling for was about to commit acts of violence I could barely comprehend. The night passed with excruciating slowness. I remained at Sophia's bedside, checking her vitals regularly, though she slept peacefully, unaware of the storm raging beyond the walls of her sanctuary. Armed guards stood outside her door, a constant reminder of the danger that had suddenly become all too real. It was nearly dawn when my phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. "Coming home. All is well." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by a wave of confusion. What did it say about me that I was relieved a man had safely returned from what was almost certainly a violent confrontation with rivals? What had happened to the dedicated nurse who had once prided herself on her ethical standards? When Dominic appeared in Sophia's doorway an hour later, I understood exactly what had happened to that woman. She had fallen in love with the enemy. He looked exhausted but unharmed, his suit exchanged for casual pants and a sweater. His eyes sought mine immediately, a question in their dark depths. "She's stable," I reported quietly, rising from my chair beside Sophia's bed. "No changes overnight." He nodded, visibly relaxing. "Thank you for staying with her." We stepped into the hallway, closing the door softly behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the events of the previous night hanging between us like a physical presence. "It's over," he said finally. "Castellano has agreed to respect our boundaries. There won't be any more incidents." I didn't ask what message had convinced Castellano to back down. Some details were better left unimagined. "And the injured man, Carlo?" I asked instead. "Recovering. Dr. Patel removed the bullet and stabilized him." Bullet. The clinical word landed with surprising force, a stark reminder of the world Dominic inhabited. "Emma," he said softly, reaching for my hand. "What happened between us last night was a mistake," I interjected, though the words felt like glass in my throat. Dominic's expression hardened. "Is that what you believe?" "It's what I should believe," I admitted. "You're my employer, Sophia's brother, a man who—" I gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the complex reality of who he was. "A man who what, Emma? A man who loves his sister, who protects his people, who hasn't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you knelt beside me in the rain." His words sent a shiver through me. "A man who lives in a world I don't belong in. Or perhaps a man who's been waiting for someone to show him another way to live," he countered, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You've changed things, Emma. Changed me." I shook my head. "I've been here a month, Dominic." "People don't change that quickly. They do when they find something worth changing for." He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my cheek. "I won't pretend I can walk away from my responsibilities overnight. But for you, for us, I would find a way to legitimize everything. Gradually transition to businesses that you wouldn't be ashamed to be associated with." The sincerity in his eyes made my heart ache. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "And I suspect you might be falling for me too, despite your better judgment." I couldn't deny it, though I knew I should. Instead, I leaned forward and kissed him, a silent confirmation of what we both already knew. 6 months later, Sophia stood in the garden of the estate, her strength gradually returning after a successful round of the experimental treatment. The cancer wasn't gone, but it was in retreat, giving her a chance at the future that had once seemed so uncertain. "You saved my life," she told me as we walked slowly along the stone path, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. I shook my head. "The treatment did that." "No, you saved us both," she insisted. "Dom was losing himself before you came, becoming harder, colder. The business was consuming him." She squeezed my hand. "You reminded him there was more to life." In the distance, I could see Dominic in conversation with Marco, reviewing security plans for the new medical foundation we were establishing, a legitimate enterprise dedicated to funding experimental treatments for rare cancers inspired by Sophia's journey. It was the first of many steps away from the shadows, a transition that would take years but had already begun. There would always be parts of Dominic Russo that belonged to a darker world. The power he wielded, the authority he commanded, the capacity for calculated violence when those he loved were threatened. These were integral to who he was. But there were other parts too, the gentle brother, who read poetry to his sister, the passionate lover who whispered my name like a prayer in the darkness. The man who was learning, day by day, that there were different kinds of strength beyond the brutal power he'd inherited. As he finished his conversation and walked toward us, his face lighting up at the sight of his sister on her feet, I felt the familiar flutter in my chest. The man I'd saved on a rainy night had, in turn, saved me from a life of exhaustion and loneliness. We had saved each other, really, found each other against impossible odds. "What are you two conspiring about?" Dominic asked as he reached us, his arm slipping naturally around my waist. "The future," I replied, leaning into his embrace. He smiled, pressing a kiss to my temple. "It's looking brighter every day," and it was. Not perfect, not without complications, but real and honest, and ours. I had stopped to help a crashed biker, unaware that the man I saved was a Mafia boss. But what I'd found was something far more complex, a man capable of both darkness and light, a family in need of healing, and a love that defied all the boundaries I thought I understood. Sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most unexpected rewards. And sometimes when you stop to help a stranger in the rain, you end up saving yourself.